made a huge difference in terms of people's personal income, but it has made some difference. And it is entirely what we said we would do at the last election. We did it in our first budget. But we are conscious of the difficulty that people in negative equity are in. That's why the deferral system is there. One of the other points I would make is that we have done everything in our part to keep the rates on this low. I think it was Senator Darcy made the point earlier in the debate that it is 0.18%. We've given a commitment that that's not going to change in the lifetime of this Parliament, as indeed will the valuation issue not change. So there is certainty now for people who have got to pay this tax half year this year, full year from next year, as to what they're going to face. Just can I put one piece of information on the record of the House last year? 80% of people in this country live in homes which are valued of 300,000 and less. So 80% of people, so if one took the 300,000 as the maximum you would pay up that cohort, you're talking about a €540 charge per year. And you can drill it all back from 540 all the way back based on the value of your property. It is a lot of money in a circumstance, Senator, where people have very little money, but still there are people who can afford to pay this. And we're confident that the deferral system we've put in place, tweaked and all as it was today in this legislation proposed by the government, as indeed it was the legislation last December, that we are doing our best to help people who find themselves on very low means, or help people who find themselves in negative equity. And I think in the balance of measures we've put in place, we're attempting to do that. Can I put two other points on the record of the House? It is worth saying one of the reasons this legislation needs to be put through is to give the full powers to Revenue to proceed now with the next stage of the implementation of this tax, but also to give guidance. And the guidance that will come from the Revenue will be crucially important for all homeowners in terms of that assistance in making sure that people understand the valuation that has been arrived at. I think I made the point earlier as well, where a person honestly values their house on foot of a revenue guidance, there'll be no further questioning of that value. If there's an honest mistake, people aren't going to be criminalised by this particular thing. We're going to work with people to make sure, in the assessment that the Revenue will send out, it will be as to what they perceive. But there is a substantial form of self-assessment in this, as is the way as we set out in the original bill. And if people choose to challenge that, they're entitled to challenge that in the context of the bill, once they can show to people that valuation and where it exists. It is worth the point that even if you defer something for up to 20 years, just say in a circumstance of person in negative equity and mortgages, which is the case of the amendment, are for people of very small means who choose to defer this over 20 years. Like even if you did it for 20 years on the trot, as it were, the total liability that would fall at that stage would be about less than 5% of the value of the house in a circumstance where that house was to be sold. So by deferring it, I've been giving advice to constituents, elderly people who are concerned about this, and I accept there is genuine concern about this. I've been advising them, they should get their loved ones to pay for this at some point in the future. They should, the idea that people should be concerned about this in a circumstance where it's just a small percentage of the total value of the property is a real issue for people. No, but the substance of the amendments before us right now is on this question of exempting people in negative equity. We believe that the deferral provisions we have put in are fair, are balanced, will allow us to raise the tax while also recognising the very difficult situation that people in negative equity are in, and we've gone as far as we can in terms of that deferral.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a number of things to the Minister. When the Minister for Finance took to his feet on Budget Day and he introduced the property tax, when he mentioned the deferral system, there was some level of relief from some of the backbenchers that maybe there was some positive news in this. But the sting in the tail, of course, was that the interest applicable on people who opt for the deferral option is 4%. So in effect, we're penalising people who cannot afford to pay the property tax by charging them an interest rate. I mean, why we have to charge an interest rate is beyond me. But that was a clear punitive measure being applied to people who may be forced into going for the deferral option. And I think, to be quite honest, it's appalling that we would either give advice to people or, by virtue of the fact of their circumstances, that they would end up having to ask their loved ones, as you put it, to pay for their taxes when they die. I mean, if you look at the extraordinary powers which have been given to the sorry, what's the gasp about? But the minister.
Because I didn't think, promoting inheritance was part of Sinn Féin's policy.
What you're talking about here is asking people in low-income families, which I know that the Labour Party and people who wear different hats outside this chamber saying one thing and come into this chamber representing the Labour Party take a different position in relation to low and middle-income families. The point is, and I'm making this very forcibly, whether people in the Labour Party like it or not, we're talking here about people on very low incomes who are being given the option of a deferral. And that deferral means they have to pay interest. And what the Minister is saying is that, well, don't pay it and then let your loved ones pay it when you die. That's essentially what's been said. I don't believe that's fair. I think there was better ways in terms of dealing with low and middle income families, and I certainly won't take any lectures from the Labour Party in relation to that. It's not true to say, by the way, that the tax will stay the same up to 2016. It is true to say that the government is not going to increase it. But, behind that spin, as we know, local authorities have been given the power in 2015 to increase the charge. So there is a strong possibility. Now, they have the power to decrease the charge as well, but we're all wise enough to know that if any local authority does anything and uses the powers that they have, it will go up. It certainly won't go down. But post-2016, God knows where the levels of the property tax will go. And the Minister says, well, it's small and reasonable amounts, and he did accept that for some families it will be difficult. The average payment will be 225, 315 and 405. Most people will broadly fit into any one of those categories on an annual basis, which is a huge amount of money for those families who are genuinely suffering and struggling at the moment. And the point is, there are better ways through income tax of raising that money, rather than just having a tax on the family home which doesn't generate income. And that's just I think a core philosophical point that I would make. So I think you haven't done enough at all, Minister, in relation to people in negative equity. We haven't done enough across the board for people who are finding it difficult in relation to paying their mortgages. But even in the context of bringing in this charge, we simply haven't done anything to support those families. And where we have in terms of the deferral system, we're going to penalise them. We're going to ask them to pay 4% interest, and I just don't believe it's fair.
Just to say, in the Minister's last comment, whether willingly or wittingly or not, he seemed to give the impression that people should be very grateful that they were lucky that it was only 5%, as opposed to what? 100%? The value? 5% is an enormous amount of the major investment of the overwhelming majority of people in this country. It's their major investment. They pay for it over most of their working life. And we're supposed to be grateful. So at the end of the day, it might be only 5%. 5% is a vast amount of money. Let them take 100% if they want to be. It's also moonshine. But I'd also like the Minister to, if he could get the opportunity to respond to what I said about the Heritage House and so on, particularly because I've been fingered in one of the newspapers. It's called the David Norris tax break. Somebody kindly drew my attention to it in a vulgar newspaper which I refused to read. But it was held out on a tongs for me to look at in the distance. And this was about a situation in Waterford and Limerick. Well, now, I'm delighted for them, but the principal Georgian corps is in Dublin. And I just wonder, it's not mentioned in this tax incentive. Is it possible for the Minister to tell the House at this stage where this will come in? And will it be extended to other? And it's only something into the future. The people who've already invested and done the very hard work year after year after year on modest incomes are not included at all.
Mr. Hayden.
Thank you very much, Laska Herlock. Just a number of points. I mean, in a number of the contributions from this side of the floor, we did raise concerns about people who are in negative equity, and we did raise concerns about people who paid substantial stamp duty and so on. And we have asked the Minister to take into account going forward that this measure should be kept under review and revisited should the need arise. But I must say, in relation to being lectured and harangued by Sinn Féin. You know, it is quite incredible to hear the Sinn Féin party justifying inheritance. You know, it is one thing to sit here and have to do things that we know will hurt people in this country because we believe it's the right thing to do in the circumstances. It is an entirely different matter. Listening to Sinn Féin preaching about income tax as though it was God's gift to the taxation policy of this country, without actually accepting that income tax in this country has been regressive. Our taxation system has been too narrow. We have basically gone nowhere in terms of expanding the tax base in this country for a very considerable period of time. Instead of welcoming this measure, which will hit certain people like the Dennis O'Briens and other people whom I know I probably shouldn't be mentioning in this House, you know, and actually bringing into play assets that are owned by these very wealthy people. I'm sitting here being lectured by Sinn Féin about the benefits of inheritance. You know, really and truly, it is quite gobsmacking.
Well, I very much agree with Senator Hayden. I made the point. I don't think Senator...
Of course you here. Just gave a Fine Gael rant. Of course you did.
No. This is a form of wealth. This is a form of wealth tax. Yeah, it is a form of wealth tax, and you're opposing something.
Home tax.
You're opposing something which will be a significant...
Shares, yachts.
You're opposing something which will be a significant liability, a significant debt on people who have very substantial means and incomes in this country. I refer to the fact that the OECD now believes, from information they have published, that the second most progressive tax system across OECD countries is our tax system because of the adjustment that's occurred in the last number of years. The European Commission has said that of the 6 most significant adjustments made of member state countries, Ireland was the most progressive in terms of taking money from those at the top of the tree. This is internationally recognised. We have come through this very difficult period with those at the top rightly.
They would say that, wouldn't they? They're forcing us to do these things, so why wouldn't they?
And this is another form, I mean, for you to suggest that you want a wealth tax and you're against this one, where all the evidence shows that those who have very substantial homes and who have very substantial means will pay a hell of a lot more than other people, is something I find difficult to understand from Sinn Féin's position, despite the fact that you have no difficulty in imposing this in Northern Ireland. You claim you want, in Northern Ireland, full fiscal autonomy from London. You claim you want tax-raising power from London. But you don't tell us how you would tax people in a circumstance where the British taxpayer writes a cheque every single month on the mantelpiece over the fire and puts this subsidy in place. You don't tell us how you would structure the taxation system where that subsidy wouldn't be there.
How they do it in Northern Ireland. I'm worried about down here.
I think the issue here is very, very simple. The 4% interest is, of course, simple interest. It's not compound interest. It's not actually 4% on accumulation. It's only 4% on what you haven't paid, and that's fair. We have put that into the legislation. How people, Senator Norris says 5% is a hell of a lot. Well, 95% is even more, Senator. And
well, we're very
if in a circumstance,
I'm on my knees.
Well, it depends who you want to leave it to, of course. 95% is a substantial asset that someone will be given at some point. On the argument that I listened to colleagues talking about there's no certainty about this, local authorities from 2015 and on can change this. I thought we're supposed to be in favour of the argument of actually giving powers to local authorities, significant fundraising powers to local authorities, which they can justify to their electoral base in their respective area, notwithstanding the equalisation issue, which I know Senator Hayden raised earlier. But I would have thought that is a good thing in terms of a progressive modern tax base, that we give powers to local authorities to change the tax base locally for the purposes of trying to do things differently with services and with services locally. So that is something that we stand over. Can I reply? I apologise for not replying to Senator Norris earlier. And I know he did raise this issue. While I'm conscious that the upkeep of historic properties is performed at significant effort and expense to the residents known as of those properties, and that a very valuable contribution to our built heritage is made by these persons, I don't intend to allow exemptions from the local property tax for listed properties. Tax relief in respect of expenditure incurred on the repair, maintenance or restoration of the approved building or garden is currently available from income tax or corporation tax to the owner-occupiers of such approved properties. And I'm satisfied that this is a more appropriate way to target support in this area. So there is support given through the taxation system for people who have these very substantial historic properties, which of course we all have an interest in making sure they restore. And that is where we are directing our relief rather than giving as an exemption, to those who currently have the property.
As it is now 2:45 p.m, I'm required to put the following question in accordance with the order of the channel of this day, that Amendment 3 is hereby negatived, and in respect of each of the sections and disposed of, the section is hereby agreed to in committee, the title is hereby agreed to in committee, the bill is reported to the House without amendment, the bill is hereby received for final consideration, and the bill is hereby passed. Those in favour say aye. Those against say nil. I think the question is carried.
Vote all.
Vote all. Members, please take your designated seats. Finance Local Property Tax. Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013 Committee Stage. The question is that Amendment 3 is hereby negatived. In respect of Section 2 and each of the sections undisposed of, the section is hereby agreed to in committee. The title is hereby agreed to in committee. The bill is reported to the House without amendment. The bill is hereby received for final consideration and the bill is hereby passed. And on that question, division has been challenged. Tellers Taw, Senators Paul Coughlin and Aideen Hayden. Tellers Niece, Senator David Kilnan and Catherine Riley. You have 1 minute starting now. That completes the time allotted for voting. The result is Taw 28, Neil 21. The carriage carried and the bill is passed.
Under Standing Order 63.3, I would like to call for a vote by means other than electronic.
Yeah, he wants to vote by other means.
Okay, the vote will not just be manual, one on one.
That vote will be taken since going on and be one and one, 2 minutes. Because you're a teller, you're entitled to.
exactly what you're going to do. Amendment and that.
Cunis, Finance Bill, Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013, Committee Stage.
If you don't listen to you, can't. Just ask what it
I'll begin again. Finance Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013 Committee Stage. The question is that Amendment 3 is hereby negatived in respect of Section 2 and each of the sections undisposed of. The section is hereby agreed to in committee. The title is hereby agreed to in committee. The bill is reported to the House without amendment. The bill is hereby received for final consideration and the bill is hereby passed. And on that question, a division has been challenged. Tellers Thaw, Paul Coughlin and Aideen Hayden, Tellers Nielsen, Sir David Cullan, Kathleen Riley. This is a vote by manual means, a walk-through vote, and the result is Thaw 28, Neil 19, and the question is carried. Now move on now to the next item number 2, statements on early intervention and the economic benefits of early intervention.
No.
We're now on to item number 2, which is statements on early intervention and the economic benefits of early intervention. I would like to welcome Minister Francis Fitzgerald to the House. You're more than welcome, and you can now proceed, Minister.
Very much. Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'd like to thank senators for putting this topic on the agenda, and I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to address the House this afternoon to discuss the importance, significance and benefit in key areas of activity within my own department focused on early intervention. I believe the debate is an important follow-up to previous discussions that we've had here on child and family services and most recently on youth work. As you are all aware, a substantial volume of valuable research now exists in relation to the benefit of early years interventions. While much of the research emanated in the first instance from the US and other countries in Europe, I am pleased that in more recent times we have seen a number of comprehensive child-centred research projects underway in Ireland, not least in my own department and the government-funded Growing Up in Ireland survey. And we now have many longitudinal reports coming in and evaluations of various pilot projects. So it's very good to be in a position to say that we now have homegrown research, we have Irish research, as opposed to relying on international research. The international research environment, of course, in this area does include a lot of diverse disciplines, such as neuroscience, genomics, sociology and economics, coming together to provide a more complete and complex picture of childhood development. Neuroscientists armed with new technologies have given us great new insights into how the brain works and what inputs are needed to get the very best and to optimise children's development. We've had pioneering experts like Michael Rutter and Sophie Scott in the UK and Bruce Perry in the US, showing the sensitivity of the human brain in the first 3 years and the learning that can take place with the right stimulation. And the downside, if you don't have that stimulation, if there's a lack of stable emotional attachment or chronic stress or neglect, the huge price that children pay for that. Not just emotionally, but actually we have the research now about the cognitive impacts and the behavioural and emotional impacts. What's new as well in the last number of years is that we have begun to quantify the costs associated with such early problems. For example, Professor Sophie Scott of London University has calculated that for a child with a conduct disorder, the cost to the economy is 10 times more than a child without. And that's very significant. And if we know that, the question then becomes, what are the interventions that we need to make? Similarly, economists can also now estimate in financial terms the short-term economic contributions of quality early years interventions and the longer-term results and investments. And there are now several long-term studies that have documented significant savings in the areas of remedial education, school dropout rates, welfare and crime. So we're getting more and more international research, and when you hear the international papers in this now, it is very interesting to hear more and more economists speaking about the long-term benefits of early intervention and the economic return. And of course, I'm focusing on that today, but obviously the personal and individual return for the children and for their families is a primary concern and is absolutely enormous. Similarly, economists can, as I say, estimate the long-term savings. In the paper I've circulated, you will see, for example, the very famous Perry School project in the States followed 123 children until the age of 27 who attended 2 years of preschool for 2.5 hours a day and received home visits from the teacher once a week. For every dollar invested in the Perry Preschool project, the benefit was determined as being over $16. And I also quote research that's coming from Columbia University. The median term savings to the state from investment in early care and education, ranging over the lifetime of the child from the $2,500 to nearly $10,000 per child. And then the savings, if you did have the right universal programs in place. I attended a presentation with very detailed economic data on the savings, for example, in the detention centres, the savings by not having to put money into crime and addictive behaviour, and they were able to track the children who had received the right interventions and were able to estimate the savings, and very substantial. And these are, very well validated and evaluated studies. In Ireland, we're also having these studies. You have the NESF made the case for state funding for universal preschool, stating it can be readily justified as the longer-term societal benefits that would accrue on the basis of this investment are at a ratio of 1 to 7. There's a very famous curve there. I won't go into too much detail about it, the Heckman curve, the Nobel laureate in economic science from Chicago, who makes the case very convincingly for early investment. And he talks about the returns to human capital investment are greatest for the young for 2 reasons. Skill begets skills, and younger people have a longer horizon over which to recoup the fruits of their investment. So it's very clear the kind of returns that one gets. It isn't just economic, of course. And we also have research in relation to the impact on educational issues. Along with the Taoiseach, I recently attended the British-Irish Council Summit in Cardiff. And the focus there, one of the agenda items, I think it's probably the first time ever that at that conference there was a focus on early years. And we shared what was happening in each of our countries in relation to interventions and early school programmes. Northern Ireland is particularly benefiting from recent developments in early education. 2 recent global surveys have indicated that Northern Irish primary pupils perform better in reading and numeracy than in any other English-speaking country in the world. And that's because there has been a radical restructuring of the foundation stage, backed by an accompanying investment in training and professional development. And they have been identified as one of the key factors contributing to this success. We've also the research coming from the Geary Institute. You'll see that children who spent any amount of time in centre-based childcare prior to school entry were rated higher than children who did not experience any centre-based childcare in the domains of social competence, language and cognitive development, and communications and general knowledge. And of course, we're talking about quality childcare. We're not talking about any childcare. We're talking about quality childcare with proper staff training and the right interventions at the right age. And I think there are issues in relation to children from 0 to 3 and how we need to best help that age group and the kind of supports that particularly more vulnerable children need. And I think that's a topic in its own right as well. We've also had in Ireland another research project that I just want to bring briefly to your attention. And that's the work that's been done in Tala, Ballymun and Darndale. And Atlantic Philanthropy has funded that. And we are getting the evaluations from very significant interventions in those 3 communities, a whole range of interventions ranging from public health nurses going out working with families, parenting programmes, working on behavioural and emotional problems, and then particular programmes to support literacy and to promote social skills and emotional understanding in children. And all of this then impacts on the child when they go into primary school and move up through the educational system. And again, they just cope much better with the various life challenges once they have this. Another point that I think we're seeing increasingly is that we should begin to think more and more about putting therapeutic services for children into schools. For example, speech therapy, occupational therapy. Many parents miss clinic appointments. If we can begin to bring the services into the early years sector and into schools, I think you're seeing where there have been pilot projects, we're getting much higher returns in terms of the take-up of such supports. So there are real benefits, as I say, and I don't think I need to really elaborate that much further. People here are very familiar with these benefits. So the question then is, how can this influence policy and what services that we're delivering as a country and as a government? First of all, just to say, I do believe we have lagged behind other countries when it comes to our early years sector. It has begun to change with the universal preschool year, but that is just 1 year. But 94% of families do take up the early school year, and that's a very important opportunity, and we have the standards issue with Ashter in place. We have the community childcare subvention, and we also have the childcare education and training supports, and we have the new after-school programme with 6,000 places. But I do want to say that I believe we have a long way to go, and there remain many challenges. We have major issues about the affordability and accessibility of childcare in this country. We need to do more to support families. We have a challenge in relation to how do we, at this point in our development, best support and regulate childminding. This has been a very informal sector here. Should it remain as informal and really up to parental choice, or is there a case, and I've asked the early years group to examine this, do we need, what I would like to see myself is more support for childminders, and childminders more effectively working with local childcare committees, so they are supported in the work that they are doing. I think we do need to reassess what's the best form of childcare for under ones. If we follow the Nordic model, you will find that parental leave and maternity leave is the under ones really benefit more from more extended leave, so that parental choice is given more support in terms of those early years. And I think that's certainly a vision that we ought to have. And also we need to see greater linkages between our primary education system and the early years. In Norway, for example, you have the same training for those who are working in early years and those who are in primary school. And we really don't have very much joined up much interaction between our primary schools and our childcare settings. We're beginning to see some more of that in some communities. So these are challenges and they can't be dismissed. I do believe we do need to examine them, and that's why I welcome this debate today. Just to say, our preschool population has increased, according to the 2011 census, by nearly 18% since 2006. So we have more children in this country, a massive resource, a national treasure, offering immense potential, and should impact on our planning in the future. Other countries are not so fortunate, and instead of seeing this as a cost, we ought to realise the huge value in our child population, not just for themselves, but as we're focusing on today, the whole question of the economy of this country. And, you know, this is why clearly we have to deal with the huge economic challenges that we face so that we can give the kind of future to these children that we want to. So the point I'm making really is that early intervention has to become even more part of our national psyche than it is at present. I think there is real need for the dissemination of this kind of information so that we do really understand the difference it would make if we invest in these early years. I do think we need to invest more. Investing in children's early years should be, as Dr. Anne Buchanan said last week, just some weeks ago, at the COFASEG conference, she said it should be an economic imperative. We're not that used to hearing that language in this country about investment in early years. We talk a lot about the economy, but we very rarely link it to the kind of investment that we need to make in our children. And I think investing in children's early years should be an economic imperative. The OECD agrees. The 2011 Economic Survey of Ireland recognised the importance of investing in early years, emphasising that in order for Ireland to preserve its strengths in human capital, we should recognise the importance of preschool education, having both a positive impact on later educational performance and an equity-enhancing effect. Of course, the direct benefits for young children themselves are well known to you all. It's a direct activation measure as well, I do want to say that, and the potential for job creation in this area should not be overlooked. The free preschool in Ireland currently supports probably 7,000 jobs, and every 10 or 11 additional childcare places we provide will create one new job. So a second free preschool year could generate quite a significant number of jobs as well. Is it realistic to be talking about more investment in this area? As people who've been discussing this recently have asked in our newspapers, is it realistic to talk about universal services? Well, I think we do have to examine how we spend our money in this country. And when you compare how we invest compared to, again, the Nordic countries, they do spend, compared to Ireland, Nordic countries spend significantly more on child services, supports for families with young children, well-paid parental leave, and a high proportion of childcare. But they have lower poverty rates. It's interesting to see that by the choices they make in terms of investment, it does work very well in terms of support to families and indeed deals with the child poverty rates as well as other factors there. We do have this history here of direct cash payments as opposed to services. And that is a very strong history. And clearly families need child benefit, they do need direct payments, but there is a stark contrast in what we spend on services compared to direct cash payments. And that is just a feature of the policies that we've undertaken in this country. And given the kind of information that's coming out about early years interventions and supports to families, that is an area that I think is worthy of discussion. And I think there's a growing acceptance that the spend on direct services is too small a proportion of the state's overall spend. And I do believe that the proportion needs to be increased. And the publication last month of the report of Tax and Welfare Advisory Group, that does raise the question of how we should reassess our overall levels of spending on service provision, in particular in early intervention and childcare services, services which improve children's outcomes while also supporting parents. I think I've spoken here before about the Early Years Strategy Group under Alish Hennessy, who will be reporting to the Department in the next few months. There's a very wide group of professionals interested in this area who will be coming forward with recommendations, which I think will help us to think well about the kind of investment we need to make in the early years. There's also a number of initiatives in the budget in relation to area-based poverty initiative, and I've given you the details of those. I think we need to ensure that the learning from the projects which I've spoken about earlier, that learning is mainstreamed around the country, because we have made that investment of 30 million. We do now know what works, and what we have to ensure is that services to children around the country, whether they're being given by public health nurses or social workers, take the lessons from the research about the kind of initiatives that work with families that I've mentioned, the parenting, the health visitors going into the family, the detailed work on literacy, the one-to-one work, all of which is being done in different projects around the country. But I think the big task now is how do you mainstream that and make sure that, that more children benefited from it rather than simply the pilot projects. In the next few weeks, I will be moving to establish the Child and Family Support Agency, and that, as you know, is an agency with a dedicated focus on child and family services. So I'll conclude by saying that there is a significant body of work underway in the department. We are focusing to early intervention. There is much more we can do. Further investment is certainly justified by the kind of figures that we have and the research that is emerging. And I do think, of course, that as we say, Tusma La Mahibra, good beginning certainly is a big part of the work, no question of that. So there are many lessons for us in the analysis of the economic analysis of early intervention, and I think there are lessons for both our budgetary strategy and our policy development over the next few years. Thank you.
On kids, Shanador, Dayton, that the whole stuff up no material.
I'd like to welcome as Minister Francis Fitzgerald to the House again. She's always welcome and indeed spent a very successful time here. And I suppose I'd also like to again to congratulate you on getting the referendum through last year. I think the actual benefits of that are coming to fruition in time. Every decision taken now can show the benefit of that particular referendum, particularly the right to adopt children from so-called married family situation, which was a terrible anomaly which deprived so many children of a second chance. And that was one of the most significant points in that referendum, which was passed so well at the time. And just as I said, that we in Fianna Fáil would like to welcome the Minister's commitment to develop a national early year strategy and the setting up the expert advisory group to advise the Minister for Children on its preparation. We believe that the Minister for Children must make a commitment in the early year strategy to put in place the supports that will require to deliver high quality staff and positive outcomes. And I'd like to compliment the Minister on putting together a very detailed speech here today, which is full of very comprehensive information. As you know, the OECD in its 2011 Economic Survey of Ireland emphasised that in order for Ireland to preserve its strength in human capital, we should recognise the importance of preschool education in having both a positive impact on later educational performance and in equity enhanced effect. And in that particular regard, I say one success of the previous government, very great success, was the establishment of the preschool section since 2000 a year. Fianna Fáil is proud of its prioritised investment in the early education and childcare sector during its time in government, and is committed to ensuring early education of children continuing to be a policy priority under the current government. Fianna Fáil welcomes the setting of the new expert advisory group, as I said already. And in relation to the whole preschool area, the free preschool year is absolutely vital. I want to compliment the Minister on actually maintaining that. That was an area I think she would have come under a certain amount of pressure. I think I'll move over slightly here. Might be nice to view the Minister when I'm discussing the actual issue. The fact that you held your line